Hi, everybody. My name is Sandy, and I'm an addict. I was listening to Lewis, and I was thinking about his presentation about knowing your region. When I became a delegate, the first World Service Conference I went to, I realized that what my region thought was a regional delegate and what the conference thought was a regional delegate was very, very different. Right? There was a huge difference. This is a lot about what the conference, like looking from the conference out of what is the expectation of the delegates, not so much looking from the regions in. And we do get in that bind a little bit, in my opinion, at least I did, between what was expected of the documents that we have at the conference compared to what my region expected me to do. So go ahead and go to the first slide. So what is a regional delegate? It's more than a rep. In fact, the name itself has been changed a number of times. It was a representative, then it was a delegate, then it was back to representative, and now it's back to delegate. So thinking about the difference between what is a representative and what is a delegate does give us some clues into sometimes the difference between what the region expects and what the conference expects. So go to the next slide. So according to the Guide to World Services, the delegate is the primary contact between NA.'s Inc., between the conference, NA.'s Inc., the World Board, everything that goes on in World Services. And there's a lot to World Services. NA.'s Inc. is like the corporation that runs our World Services, but then there's the conference, there's all this stuff that goes on. So we're the link between the locals and all the stuff that goes, the whole world, right? Basically, so it's a lot, right? We provide information on the what's going on with the projects and stuff like that. Like I always tell lately in every one of my reports, I mention that they can get on that, the new book that they're writing and things like that. We provide a local perspective, right, to other people in the world and to World Services, the conference in general. And we go to the World Service Conference as a fully active participant in the World Service Conference, which is what I call in my world a term of art. A conference participant actually means something maybe a little bit different than what a delegate means, right? What a regional delegate means, but go to the next slide. So this is out of the Guide to World Services, and it says, while the delegate is elected by and accountable to their regional assembly, or RSC, he or she is not a mere messenger. The delegate is selected by the region's group representatives and/or RCMs to act in the best interest of NA as a whole, not solely as an advocate of his or her own NA community's priorities. And this was explained to me when I got there because I thought I was an advocate, like a representative, like an agent of my region, to go with my region's conscience, you know what I mean? And, be an advocate for my region, but that's not really that's what my region thinks. But then from the conference perspective, that's not what the conference thinks. That's not what the Guide to World Services said. So go on. So in my opinion, anyway, this is just how I see it. I see a little rift between the second concept and the third concept. At least that's in my mind how I see it. And in my region, specifically my area, they very much are focused on the second concept. The groups, the groups, the groups, the groups, the groups. No autonomy to anybody. I actually went to a service committee meeting one time where they debated because the groups hadn't voted for the picnic people to buy more ketchup. And instead the picnic people went out and bought ketchup without running that first by the groups, right? So this rift between concepts 2 and 3, what has to go to the groups and what do we delegate, right? Where is that delegation line, right? And what I found was that when I went to the World Service Conference, the conference, I don't mean like the participants, but like generally the conscience of the conference was that I would be delegated more than my region had let me be delegated. And I was unprepared when I got there because I really didn't have that much delegation to me. So I guess, does anyone else see it that way? And does anybody else want to weigh in on this kind of rift between what goes to the groups and what is delegated and how your regions or areas have resolved that?
So actually, I'll go ahead and start as an
Thanks,
addict.
Dennis.
And maybe this will help get some of the conversation flowing. In my case, when I was a delegate, it wasn't as much a rift as it was a balance. As I did car and cat workshops, I made it very clear that I wasn't trying to sell anyone information. I was presenting information and not telling you what to think about it. And I was listening carefully for what you felt about it so that I could better understand where you stood on different topics. I came out with a very good sense of how different areas as a culture felt about different issues. I knew that if something came up at the conference to seat a region that wasn't something someone voted on, I had authority to move forward because no one was opposed to that. Everyone was in favor of that. So I knew that most of our areas are very critical of World Board Authority, even if we support World Services. So anything that would be expanding on that, if it didn't come to the groups, I knew I would have to vote no. And at the same time, as I was delegated, anything whatsoever in that, anytime I expressed anything in that delegation, I reported exactly what I did and why, where I got that thought from. So like with each conference, I blogged the entire conferences, every vote, every straw poll, everything that I did on behalf of the region, I blogged. So everyone that was paying attention could see exactly how they were being represented. And it helped with that transparency, with that trust of they felt that I really did listen to them and more than just their votes. I knew that as I was I had authority to participate in various things, but like I could participate in the workshops, helping things move forward. But I knew, in knowing the conscience and the culture of the local areas, even if I felt strongly in one direction, I knew that if I participated to help move that along, people would be like, why did you do that? You know how we feel. So that the transparency that I practiced to the best of my ability and the listening that I did in building the trust of the local groups and areas, I think allowed there not to be so much of a rift for me. And if there was a question of where this falls, I knew that I needed to default to, it goes to the groups. If I couldn't figure out where, if I didn't feel comfortable enough that I had a sense or a conscience of the local culture, then I needed to default to, how are they going to feel if I move in a direction on this? No, then I need to default to I need to wait on this, pause, go back to the groups, get more information. And we are largely, like when in doing the car cat in the car, it was whatever the tally says, do, period. Doesn't matter whether I love it, hate it, anything. But we also did a hybrid of, if something comes up that changes the nature of something, whatever, I could change the vote. And I'll shut up with the example on this. One example was in 2014, I think it was, the vote to take alternate delegates from the floor. We voted as a region, yes, take ADs from the floor. And I'd asked as a delegate, please put why you're voting what you're voting. And everyone put that voted yes to make it more fair to non-English delegates, because that was one of the rationale in presenting the motion. Everyone, oh, that makes sense, great. So I get to the conference and that motion is presented. I have a yes vote to take alternate delegates from the floor. But then the first person to speak up is Veronica from Sweden, saying, please don't take our alternates from us. We're part of a team. We're not native English speakers. We need their help. And then one by one, more non-English speakers said, please don't take our teammates from us. So what was I to do? Was I to vote yes, because that was the number and the vote I was sent, or was I to vote no and go with the conscience I was sent? And I voted no, and I reported that, and the region went, okay, you did the right thing, thank you. So it's that the transparency and listening.
I want to interrupt you. At that conference too, something happened when that was on the floor, and a delegate fell ill and was in the hospital, and the alternate had to step up. So that also might have changed how people saw that. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard to account for that kind of thing, right?
Yep. And I mean, that's all I had anyway, so.
Yep. And I think that Lewis did a good job explaining this too earlier when he was talking about when he moved from one region to another, and one region was the group tally, and the next region was like, the groups don't even care about this. You're entirely delegated, right, to do what you want to do.
And if I can just jump in on there, what's interesting is that it's a whole different service affect. You know, Chicagoland, it's very much third concept. I mean, we make decisions at region. We meet monthly. It's consensus-based decision-making. Issues go back to groups as should, but we rarely ever send something back. But yet no one gets upset. For example, when we moved the office, I mean, it's like, it was a unanimous vote. It had been under discussion for 5 months. And they accepted our delegated authority. And that would never have flown where I used to live, if I could say. Anyway, sorry to jump in.
Oh, George has his hand up. Go ahead, George.
My name is George. I'm an addict. I would just like to say too, you know, I think as addicts, we get caught up in the by golly, this is the black and white of everything. When in fact, when we're elected or, you know, nominated, pushed forward, and we agree to do a term, we are trusted servants, and that means they actually trust us.
Well,
Hopefully.
Some places do.
Hopefully.
But this is something that I know I have to explain to my regions and areas, that you know, there is some delegation that has to go on here. Go on, Sherry. Yes.
One of the things I found that was helpful in helping to make decisions, or, you know, that motions may have been altered or changed at the conference, is to attend different CAT events. That way you hear the pros and cons that may be different from what's in the CAR and CAT. And you may also hear other delegates saying, well, my region is bringing this motion because we don't like this or we don't like that. And gathering up that information to present at our DSR assembly, or actually we do 4 CAR workshops throughout our region. We also, you know, I've also given, well, I heard the so-and-so from so-and-so say this, so-and-so from so-and-so say that. If it were to go that way, how do you feel about that? That would be entirely different from the way it's in our CAT. That way, I think I felt that I've gotten a better pulse as to how to proceed at the conference.
Okay, Dennis, do you have something quick? Because we have to move on. But
actually, yeah, it makes a good, what I just put in the chat, a reminder. I wasn't perfect in trying to act as a delegate in some cases, because there was in one case I heard at CAR workshops a desire for something on DRT to be fleshed out, so we'd stop driving out newcomers with one opinion or another. Just could we have some way of being welcoming? And I heard that, and I ended up presenting in the conference a new business proposal to at least bring the discussion to the table. But then an area in the region, when I got back, went, wait, who told you could do that? You didn't have authority to do that. And they were right for calling me out, because I technically, at something of that scope, I didn't have authority to do. But the beautiful thing was, I like being grateful for being called out for that. And the way that we ended up as a region participating in those discussions and that area, bringing it to the table, it was really powerful, and it ended up leading to us putting that motion in the CAR. And everyone was happy with that process. But it was like, we have the other balance of that is, if you step out when you are delegated and your region says, wait a minute, who said you could do that? Being open to, okay, you're right, I am your servant. How can I better serve, and how can I better act as your conduit and connection?
thank you. So one thing, as I look through all these materials like that, I realize is that the conference does expect delegation and my region does not. So anyway, so go on to the next slide. So what is a conference participant? This is from the Guide to World Services, right? Throughout the cycle, the conference participants meet to discuss issues relevant to World Services, NAS Inc., or NA as a whole. Communication in between meetings of the conference, like this meeting, right, prepares conference participants to act as fully informed conference members at the meeting. It becomes as important, if not more so, than the time spent at each conference meeting. So these meetings between the meetings. So go on to the next slide, Dennis. So who are the conference participants? Who other than the RDs? Anybody got somebody other than an RD?
The AD.
The AD, very good. Anybody else?
World Board.
The World Board members, that's right. And what about the trusted servants? Maybe not the trusted servants, the service workers. I mean, they're not really participants, but there's a couple other conference participants other than, I guess the special workers really aren't.
Zonal Delegate.
I think What now?
Zonal
The
delegates.
zonal people, right? Because now we have the zonal participants, right? We've got the HRP people, I think are probably conference participants, and the facilitators, right? And possibly the special workers that are there, right? So it's conference participants is like bigger than just the RDs. It's the people participating in the World Service Conference.
No
So
staff.
how do these, I'm sorry, what'd you say?
No staff.
The NAS staff, right? The special workers, right? Exactly. Got, you know, a lot of them like Steve and Anthony, right? And all those people that work there, right? Did you want to say something, John?
Yes. It's come up a few times in our region. We're part of the Northeast Zonal Forum. So we have a representative that goes to the world from the Northeast Zonal Forum. Is that true?
Not yet.
Okay, so if we have someone from the Northeast Zonal Forum and all the regions have a vote, doesn't that give us 2 votes?
I can somewhat answer this a little bit. I'm not that hep to World Services, but I think the only one that gets to vote is if there's an unrepresented region in your zone.
2.
We all have RDs, so you're right. Because we all have RDs, I don't think our zonal rep would get a vote.
So
have I got that right?
To clarify, the zone doesn't have zonal delegates to the World Service Conference. We are not seated at the World Service Conference because we do not have 2 or more unseated regions or communities. We do not run into that at all. We don't even have a voice at the World Service Conference. We don't have a place on the floor as an unseated zone because we don't have those unrepresented communities. The zones that have delegates at the World Service Conference have 2 or more unseated regions or communities that do not have a voice at the World Service Conference. Those zones are actively discussing how they go about gathering that conscience and where they fit. So they're not doing duplication of votes or voice. They're really targeting, trying to represent the voices that aren't present at the conference.
You got that, John? So we wouldn't get 2 votes. You can't get 2. Sergio, what did you want to say?
I agree that the components that we are talking about in the conference are okay, but I'm doubt about the groups. If this principle of delegation is enough to take out the group of one of the conference of participants. They are the most important.
Exactly. So anyway, so we'll go on. It's a tricky situation for sure. So how do we as conference participants engage in between World Service Conferences, right? We do stuff like this, and then what else do we do? Anybody else?
Conference Participant Board.
There's the Conference Participant Board that somebody already brought up, right? What else do we have?
Webinars.
Webinars. Don't we have meetings with the World Board or NAS or something? Don't they set, is that what you're talking about, the webinars?
That's webinars, the conference participant webinars.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's actually, I got roped in at a world convention. That was where I got my first fire for service work. I went into San Antonio at the world convention, and there was like 400 people in there, and there were like 10 members of the board in the room that day, and they were giving these people just an unimaginable ration of grief. And after about 30 minutes or whatever, and 4 or 5 issues came up, and then finally they went around the table and the board members talked about what they donate to the fellowship every year personally. Right. And as somebody with 4 years clean in 2007, I'm like, I'm not doing shit, you know, so I got busy.
All right. And another thing is zonal forums, right? We are, when the RDs meet for zonal forums, right? We are conference participants that are meeting in between World Service Conferences, right? So every time you go to a zonal forum, that's what you're doing. So go on, next slide. All right, the effectiveness of each conference meeting depends on the preparation of all conference participants, the amount of information that must be read and understood is quite daunting. This is why I think Randy's got it right. Go to the next slide. And his, right, what to read. Let's start here. The Guide to World Services, right? A lot of what we're going to go over today is in the Guide to World Service. We are expected to read the Guide to World Service. Right here, right? We're supposed to be familiar with this document, cover to cover, pretty much, right? Because they're going to change it when you get there. For those who've never been there, the first motion will be about changing this, and you'll be like, I didn't even know what it said in the first place. So you are expected to know that as best you can. And also NAWS News, which I rarely myself, I have to say, but the NAWS News is how the World Board is expecting the fellowship to communicate with them. That is their expectation, is that NAWS News is like the primary way that the board communicates with the fellowship. So being as our regions are not reading NAWS News, we really should be reading NAWS News. Go on. The Intellectual Property Trust, which is going to get changed this year. And there's stuff in the Intellectual Property Trust, this legal document about us, about the RDs, and about our legal responsibilities for the money. The budget, well, COVID's weird, but the budget is about $8 million a year coming in and out of NAWS Inc., right? Most of that money, so when we vote every 2 years, that's $16 million. Most of that money is coming out of this document called the Fellowship Intellectual Property Trust, which holds all the literature, right? And in that actual legal document, they talk about us and what we're supposed to be doing as, I'm going to use a legal word, fiduciaries. A fiduciary is like a trusted person, right? So we're like the fiduciaries for the fellowship in monitoring the money in the trust. That's what the regional delegates do. And so I didn't know that until I read the trust, but it says it right in there, right? So let me just take one quick second and explain a trust really simply, at least my understanding of a trust, right? So my parents have a trust, right? So my parents would be called the trustee, the trustors. It was their money to start with, right? The trustors. They put the money in a trust, and they have trustees, which is me and my sister, to decide how the money is going to be, you know, reinvested or manipulated or sold or bought or whatever. And our motivation for doing that, it has to benefit the beneficiaries of the trust. The beneficiaries are all my siblings, the grandchildren, and all these people, right? So that's like the three main members of the trust. Who's the trustor, who's the trustee, and who are the beneficiaries? So we have a very unusual trust in NA because we have like a fourth part. So the trustors is the fellowship as given voice by their delegates, right? They're the people who used to have all the literature, right? They're my parents, right? The trustees are the World Board, but kind of, and they're supposed to spend the money for the benefit of the beneficiaries, which is again the fellowship. So it's like the same people on each end. But what's weird about our trust is that those trustees cannot act until the regional delegates tell them to. So if your fellowship is having a hard time with how that trust money is being spent, that is on you as a regional delegate. We are voting for that budget. We are voting, we are saying, yes, spend that money on that project plan. The delegates are the ones directing the trustees, the board, on how the money should be spent. So if you don't understand the financials, just ask questions. No one's doing anything wrong. You know what I mean? But we should have some basic understanding of those financial documents since we're going, okay, right? Even though we trust them, of course, we delegate to them because we elected them. But still, we didn't necessarily elect the special workers, right? The people that work at NAWS and whatever. Anyway, because the trust says it's really us doing it, I feel like I wanted to understand it more. And we have to approve amendments made to the trust. And as most of you know, this cycle, they are making some amendments to that trust. So we should, in our meetings between the meetings, start to understand what it says now, what they're trying to change, just so we know what we're doing. And, you know, we'll probably say, okay, maybe we'll say yes, maybe we'll say no. But either way, at least we should understand it. So go on to the next slide. The annual report. The annual report is this has all the financials in it. You'll see all the donations from all, there's a lot of information in that annual report, actually. It's quite a lengthy document, and there's quite a few essays in there about how they're spending money and PR efforts and blah, blah, blah. But there's also a breakdown of all of the donations. And the last one that I looked at, like I said, the budget's like $8 million. There's like $1 million in donations. So like 7 million of that dollars is in that trust, right? That we're supposed to be monitoring, right? And so the annual report, and ask questions. If you don't understand like how to read them, you're not alone. You're not like the only RD that doesn't know how to read a financial document. So just ask about it. When we get there, they give time. Anthony will explain it, right? And then the World Board External Guidelines, I just mentioned that. They don't really say a lot, but we are the only ones that can change those guidelines for the World Board. Next slide. The conference report. Just a second. Oh, yes, George, go ahead. What did you want to say?
I just wanted to say, would you point out to everybody that they can go to the NA.org site and see the yearly financials right there on that page? Because there are members of my area that have never seen that. I'm like, dude, all you got to do is do a little research.
It's right there. The annual report is up there. The FIPT is up there. Just put it in your search bar and all that stuff is there. But I think so. The conference report, not the conference agenda report. For those who are new, catch up. It's the conference report, which comes out right before you go and has our week laid out. And sometimes that's the first time we find out about some of these topics. So going back to that original thing, delegate representative, like if you don't even know what we're talking about until you get the conference report, how would you ever get a conscience from your region about what you're supposed to say? So the conference, that's what I'm saying, like the conference looking out expects you to be delegated because they want you to participate in this stuff without running everything by your groups, right? So you get this report right before you go. Separate from the conference agenda report, which you get 6 months before you go, and which you can have a chance to conference, right? That has the motions and all that kind of stuff of what we think about. But there's tons of other stuff that goes on at the conference that's not in the car. Only takes a certain amount of time, like 1 day to go over that. And you're there 10 days. So this one you get six months ahead. Next slide. Now here's one for those who are new, the CAT. So the CAT has a lot of the financial stuff in it. It has the annual budget in it. It has the seating requests in it. It has the project plans for spending money on new project plans. It's a lot of financial information, and it's not in the car. It only comes out 90 days before. Right. Again, the financials are for the RDs because I see the bottom line there. We're supposed to approve all that, right? Because under the terms of the trust, we're directing. That's what we're really doing when we're voting. We're directing the trustees how to spend the money. So go to the next slide. The CAT is a little bit weird because I guess back before I got involved, when they separated the car from the CAT, right? The reason was because they thought this stuff was maybe, I don't know, too complex, too heady, like Lewis in Chicagoland. They don't care about this stuff, right? So I think the original intention, it sounds like, was that these issues in the CAT would not be discussed at the group level, right? Because the quotation at the bottom says, this frees up our members and groups to devote their attention to holding meetings and carrying the message of recovery without having to ratify every decision made on their behalf at every level of service. So I think the point is, it's that, I do conference the CAT. So I have to do all my learning days in like a 7-week period. But go on to the next slide. Okay, the large group discussion. How am I doing on time? 2:30. What else do conference participants read? This is going to be good. To be more informed about the World Service Conference, NAWS in general, the corporation, the World Board, and other issues affecting world services. So what have other of the experienced members or the non-experienced members read to prepare them? Bill.
Sorry, I didn't mean for my hand still to be up, but while you got me, I'll say the NA.
The NA. Has anybody read old minutes? from old World Service conferences? Randy, a lot of people do that. They read like last year's minutes. Or Bill was just talking, or who was just talking about reading an old annual report, right? Looking up last year's annual report, right?
I would like to, it's not available.
But he's trying to. See, he's trying to read something else. In spite of all that huge list I just gave you, there's even more stuff that you could read.
And yeah, I'll go along with reading the old stuff. When I was delegate, I didn't have an alternate, and I was an alternate and became delegate 4 months before the 2014 conference, and I'd never been to a conference, had no experience with the conference, and had never done a car workshop and all that. So I went back and read all the conference minutes from 76 to current, so I could kind of get a context of where we were at. There's a couple websites, carrythemessage.com, magshare.net/narchive. I think NACA has one. But going through and reading all that stuff gave me a sense of where we were at and how we got there in the big conversation. Because the thing about the conference is that, like, we're used to in areas and regions, we show up, do our service, and it's just like, it only exists in that moment. The conference and World Services just keeps going, and it's a part of a bigger conversation that spans decades. So in looking at how conversations evolve over the years, zonal conversations started in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And here we are now, zones are starting to kind of step up decades later. And the conversation has gone on. CBDM being part of a conversation at the conference started back in the 90s. Like, these conversations span decades, and reading that history is very, it takes time and it can be tedious, but hey, what else do you got to do when you're on a flight to California sometimes? But it was extremely helpful in helping present information. So when I get asked questions by areas at workshops, well, where did this come from? I'm like, well, if you look in this set of minutes for this happened at this time, and here's how this evolved into this. Here's why we're at this today. So it was very helpful.
And that goes back to the meetings between the meetings, right? I am not going to read old meeting minutes. That's not my style. But I will go to the zonal forum where Dennis is. And when it comes up, Dennis can tell me, oh, this came up before, right? Because there are a lot of people. Dennis is not the only one that reads old minutes. I'm surprised no one else here does, because I've heard that many, many times, that RDs read old minutes. I'll just tell you something I read, which probably no one else would ever read, but I didn't, just from my mind and how my mind works, I also got on the AA website to see how their corporate structure worked, right? And what they did with their board. So I had some like context of like, and another fellowship too, like how other fellowships operated and like what was ours different or the same. And it was interesting just to see that there was like different ways to do it, and our way wasn't the only way. So anything else anybody has read? Now we all know to ask Dennis about old minutes. So we'll do the next slide. All right, so this is the thing, is at the conference, we are expected, in my opinion, I felt I was expected. Now, I went a long time ago. I went before the changes. And what Lewis was talking about before, now this was about this second and third concept thing, right? I went in 2014. Back, you'll hear all the horror stories, right? About old business lasting 65 motions. We're there till 2 o'clock in the morning. It was like crazy. And I left and I wrote this essay, I guess I'll call it, about all my complaints about the World Service Conference and how I thought it could have been done differently. And I submitted it, but I said, I'm just a member. I was very clear that I wasn't speaking for my region. I was not speaking for ABCD. I was speaking just as the addict that had been to the conference. And because one of the things I noticed was my region expected me to only do what they told me to do and be a representative, right? And when I got there, I realized that was really pretty impossible to do, because they were going to argue about these motions till like 2 o'clock in the morning and try to change my mind to reach consensus. And I couldn't change my vote. I didn't have the authority, right? So as they move more toward consensus-based decision-making, I need to start to explain to, just for me, I need to start to explain to my region somehow that it's not going to be all about a vote from the groups. It's going to be about a conscience, right? Like Dennis was talking about, like trying to glean information. So if things change, you know what I mean? I can move with it by understanding my region, not necessarily being tied to a vote, which is very tricky if you're from an old-fashioned region like mine. Quote, much of the time spent at the conference is focused on building consensus on important agenda issues. It is about finding the common ground that every participant can support. The benefits or results of this process are a greater understanding of the proposals, agreement among the participants to move forward, not the groups, the conference participants to move forward. And if needed, the modifications of the proposals being considered to reflect the will of the body, which has been clarified from the discussions. So that's why I'm saying that, like, when I read these materials, the conference expects me to be a delegate. You know what I mean? And my region expects me to be a representative. It's a little tricky. This sometimes, and that's what I wrote at the bottom, this sometimes can be hard for an RD that only can go with their votes, right? That's what we talked about earlier in Lewis's presentation. We discussed how many areas and regions are still using Robert's Rules of Order and a vote versus consensus, right? So we're drifting toward consensus, and the conference is moving to consensus quicker than my region is. So that's a trouble I have. Go to the next slide. Another thing at the conference is we have to approve the budget, right? Decisions concerning NA's intellectual property trust, that's $7 million of the $8 million, directly affect each individual NA group as well as NA as a whole. For this reason, such decisions are made by the duly authorized representatives for the NA groups, their regional delegates, when they RDs gather at NA's World Service Conference. So that's what I'm talking about. Right in the FIPT document, it says we make the decisions about how the money is spent, which is an awesome responsibility. It's a lot of freaking money. So therefore, it's us. It's not really the World Board. It's really, I mean, they're the ones suggesting it, and we're pretty much going to give them everything they want because they know more about it than we do. But we should at least understand what we're doing. So go on with the next slide. Elections. This is another one where you really can't get your conscience of your region. You can say, oh, I only do my conscience of my region, but you really can't, in my opinion, you can't get it. You get these, what they call, candidate profile reports, right? You get them right before you leave, like 3 days before you leave, and you can't distribute them, you can't copy them, you can't disseminate them. How are you supposed to get a conscience from your region? So you can say and give lip service that it's my region's voice, but it's not. It's a lot of these things, it's your voice. And you bring to it. That's why the preparation is important, you know, to know your region, do your reading, know what you're getting into, right? Because you're going to be called on to make these kinds of decisions, whether your region wants you. I mean, you can abstain from it all if you want to, but it's very hard when you go to vote for some of these people to know what your region would want you to. At least it was hard for me. I did it twice. I went to 2 conferences, but it was hard. Anyway, next one. You also have these breakout rooms and discussions, right? Like we're having here. We just had these breakout rooms with Lewis, and you didn't ask your region what you were going to say. You didn't bring the voice of your region. You brought you, right? So most of the week is spent in these like breakout rooms and like little discussion areas where you're talking about issues that you just found out about when you got your conference report. You had no idea what they were going to talk about until you get there. And then you're in a room at a table with 8 other people and you start talking and they write it on the wall. But you didn't get any of for the most part. I mean, you know your region. That's why that first session was the first session, right? Because you know your region, but anyway, but you don't really know. You don't have a vote or anything about what they're going to say. So next slide. So this is, oh, wait a minute. Small group discussion. Do we have time for this? 2:41? Not really. This was supposed to be a breakout room.
We can do large group, raise hands.
We'll do a large group. What experience, strength, and hope will you bring to the World Service Conference? Is your own personal experience, strength, and hope important? Why or why not? How can you get some conscience from your region before WSC on topics that might come up, or even at the WSC? Like Dennis was talking about, he streams the whole thing, which I'm not going to do, but that's an idea, right? So does anybody want to share on any of these topics? Sergio.
In a situation that my region has a strong opinion about an issue, and in my vision, the other people, it isn't the best for NA as a whole. What can I say to my region?
You understand completely my presentation, Sergio. Good job.
Okay.
Right? It's hard. It's hard because the region sees it differently than the Guide to World Services sees it, right? Maybe BYOHP, Bring Your Own Higher Power, has the answer for you. Go ahead, bring your own higher power.
Okay.
Hey everyone,
thanks.
I'm Shane. I'm an addict.
What's your name?
Shane, I'm an addict.
Shane?
Trying to get where you all can see me. Sorry.
We can see you.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really kind of helped me feel empowered as an individual, watching and feeling kind of helpless being in an unceded region. I'm in the Bluegrass Appalachian region for 16 years now. Is proposing amendments during workshops. Things that we understand, maybe have some experience with, we can offer some amendments because we don't get to make motions. We never have. And honestly, making amendments is more fun. Most of the work's already done, and usually there's just a little bit that might need to change. And we've actually had an impact. People in our region have had an impact on the last two conferences. Just communicating with RDs during the car day and the cat days, just in private chats and other things. So it's gotten a lot smaller. It used to be this huge big thing, and it was so difficult. Communication was broken, and with a lot of the virtual stuff now and social media, it's gotten a lot smaller, and we all feel more included where we haven't before. And that's been a huge thing, is just keep those conversations open, and maybe we can have a night that makes this better. And I'll give you a perfect example. I've heard there's going to be a motion coming up about, this is something we heard through the grapevine, and about virtual literature being available to inmates in the United States and being made available across the United States. And I suggested to an RD, well, how about you make it available to anybody that actually has it available around the world, and you might get more buy-in from the entire fellowship, not just a US-centric motion. And so we'll see what happens there. But that's something I can directly think of in the last couple of weeks that maybe we had some input on. So that's all. Thank you.
Thanks. And Louis, I'm going to call on you next, but I want you to think about Sergio's question. What does he do if his region feels very strongly about an issue, but from his knowledge now about World Services, he doesn't feel like it's best for NA as a whole? What should he do? Or nothing? Or what should he do? Should he vote with his region? What should he do?
I'm Louis. I'm an addict, and I'm about to lose battery power. So if I die, I'll die. To his question, it must have been what, in 2008, I guess it was. NAS and decided to change the design of the medallions to Arabic numerals instead of Roman numerals. And there were 4 regional motions in the car, it was, to go back to Roman numerals. Those regional motions were conflicting in some respects, but my region voted for all of them. In the interim, it was decided that we'll go back to Roman numerals. And by the time we got to the conference, it was no longer a realistic thing. It was no longer an important topic, but yet I still had these votes from region. So I voted yes, even though the motions were moved. I mean, I do have to follow the conscience of my region, and that was a very clear conscience that I got. And sometimes, you know, I do have to accept that will and recognize it's not my view I'm carrying. It's a lot easier involving but one thing I want to comment on is how can you get some conscience on topics that may come up. One thing I did do is I followed very closely the applications for regional seating, and so even though there were no car votes on those, I put each one to a vote to the region. So when it came up to the floor of the conscience, I had a conscience on each regional seating, and so there are lots of things like that I find in the car, the CAT, in the conference participant boards, and other things where I can anticipate what's going to be coming up and get a sense from my region as to what they're going to favor. In 2006, I think it was, even though I'm an openly gay man, everyone knows, my region was very interested in you know, doing more LGBTQ things for that community, and they gave me a conscience to support whatever LGBTQ issue came up on the floor, and that was the conscience. That was a conference where we got rid of the convention guidelines that prohibited common needs meetings and workshops, and instead the conference mandated them. So I was able to benefit from the advanced conscience I got from my region, even though I didn't ask them for it as a gay man. So anyway, I've got to get my power plug. So
thank you. Yes, I also was confused about the time. So this is great. So we have plenty of time for discussion. So go on, Randy.
Yeah, I'm Randy Attic. I was thinking about the last conference we had, the virtual conference. A lot of things came up in the virtual conference that we had to make a decision on. And you know what? When the first question says, what experience, strength, and hope will you bring to the WSC? It would be teamwork, because I am not working alone. I am not working alone. I have an RD and an AD, and hopefully before the conference, we'll have an RDA too. We conscious that through our whatever app we want to use. Last time it was text, and we text on every issue that came to surface. So we were not alone. We was going with the regional conscious, what we thought, and some of them we was deadlocked because 2 people believed in it and 1 person didn't believe, and we abstained, or however we voted. But I know as an RD, I'm not alone. I have a team. Thank you.
Yes, you are lucky to have that team. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I just a couple thoughts. I know when I was a delegate, what was a lot more valuable to me, or what was super valuable to me, was having a regional assembly where we invited groups and members to come and ask questions and talk about their feelings about what was in the car and the CAT. At that time and since, I've really wondered, or I think a lot about, like, how much time we dedicate to talking about this exact thing. How do we carry our conscience? When, like, I know in my region at that time, there were probably 500 groups. I think on a good, at a good conference, maybe 25 groups would submit input about the car or the CAT. So to call that the conscience of my region is one question.
Exactly.
So for me, the input from the individual conversations and phone calls and emails I got from the members of my region was just a much more valuable thing to me. Mm-hmm. And when I got to the floor, or when I got to the conference, you know, the times that I was there, I'd say it was just a small percentage of what we did. I mean, there was so much to do with the conference, and so little of it really had to do with things that were specifically addressed in the car or the cat. But what I really wanted to say about this is like my own personal experience, strength, and hope. Why was that important? I can say what was important was having served my region for like a super long time. When I got to the conference and there was, I remember this one motion in particular that had to do with voting, who could vote and who couldn't. It came off the floor, so it wasn't in the car or the cat. And I wasn't, like, I knew exactly how my region was going to vote on it because I had seen motions at my region that had addressed exactly that. As a matter of fact, there was a long example where it's like, you know, in my region, it's only RCMs really that vote. And a motion came up that gave the vote to all the subcommittee chairs. But it turns out that, and that passed, but then at the next region, it was obvious that that motion had been, it was kind of out of order. And so the chair said, hey, this was out of order. All these people have the vote now. We want to revisit it. Everyone that had been given the vote abstained. Like all the subcommittee chairs didn't want to participate in that important decision-making thing. And it ended up that really my region only wanted the RCMs to be able to vote on things. So when we got to the conference, I was like, okay, that informed me. And I think just showing up and participating in the discussions about all the proposals and motions that are at my region, having a history with serving them is by far the most important thing that I have to bring with me to the conference.
Thank you, Bill. Sherry.
Hi, everyone. I just want to piggyback a little bit on what Lewis said, because we were one of the regions that actually presented a car motion on the medallions. And I was at the conference when we were told that they were going to go to the Arabic, and I wasn't happy about the process, but it was, you know, explained to us that World Services has that ability to make changes like that. And they asked for the conscience of the conference at the time, but it didn't go back. And at the time, the conscience of the delegates was proceed forward. We give you a vote of confidence to do the Arabic numbers. I think as delegates, we need to also put out there if something doesn't feel right. And for me, it didn't feel right. And I know I went back and we had a GSR Sunday the following and starting blah, blah. What I did was, and I specifically remember it, going, how do you feel about this? And I said, raise your hands. I want to hear from you guys. How do you feel about this? Yes, it's already been done, but how do you feel about it? And they all said they didn't like it. And I said, then let's do something about it. And at that point, we started doing a motion to be put into the car. And at that point, back then, it was getting it car ready. And I can remember that had challenges. I don't know if any of you guys ever had that.
Oh my God, it's a nightmare.
Poor Ron Miller, he was dealing with me, and I think they gave up and put Becky on me. And but anyway, our motion was in there. Now the challenge came because if you guys remember, they also did a survey. It was one of the first surveys put out to the fellowship about the Roman numerals and the Arabics. And they got, and I was told by Anthony later that they got more response on the Roman numerals on the medallions than they did for the 6th edition basic text. Okay. And, but anyway, awesome. But the challenge came because of that survey, they said, we're going back to the Roman numerals. So we had this motion that we had worked their butts off. We'd gotten their conscience. Everyone was excited about it in our region that we were doing this. And so then I was approached on pulling it because it was already going to happen. It was already going to change. So, you know, as the delegate team, we talked about it and, you know, we came to the conclusion, we don't need to pull it. If it's voted on, we'll get a conscience. But anyway, the outcome was going to be hopefully the same. We were going back to Roman numerals, and that was the goal. And to proceed on, I was still carrying the conscience of our region and kept the motion in because I didn't feel that as a delegate, and I'm saying I, but it was a team effort. Randy knows, well, maybe not. Yeah, we started the team term back then. Before it was all separate positions. But anyway, we kept it in, and the outcome was what it was. And it had our region feeling empowered, and that this was their fellowship, and that they did have an actual voice in it. So I really liked that experience that I got to have with doing that motion. So thanks.
Thank you, Sherry. And before I go to Dennis, there's just, as people were sharing, I thought of four things. One for Sergio, that I think that in spite of the fact that we're told to be automatrons when we're presenting material and not put our personal opinion into it, the reality is you do have an education that a lot of people in your region do not have. And you could bring that experience, strength, and hope, or that perspective to the discussion about why you think that it may not be best for other people around the world, because the people in your region may not see it that way. I know I have done that. Even though they say I'm supposed to be a neutral, I have said, well, if you look at it, if you think about a region like the Netherlands, which is brand new, right? Because they're not thinking like that, because they didn't meet Willie. I met Willie. I met Sergio, and they didn't. I met the guy from Iran, right? That with the 100 sponsees. They didn't meet him. So I can share that. I can't change their conscience. I mean, if they vote, they vote. But I can bring my own experience, strength, and hope to that conversation to help the region maybe better understand what it is that I'm seeing from my experience as a delegate that they may not be able to see, because it's a two-way street. Remember one of the first two slides, we're between the regions and world, right? It's not just the regions telling the world what to do. It's the world trying to communicate with our regions also, right? So I'm doing both of those communications. I'm not just a mouthpiece for my region. I'm also supposed to be bringing information back to my region from other people. And then a couple other things I was thinking I should add in as a slide, Dennis, on this one is those votes at the conference, right? Where they go, how does everybody feel about this? And those votes come back to haunt us later sometimes, right, Sherry? Because they say the conscience said whatever. And it's something at the spot. They said, how many people want to whatever? And then they say, like, I think it came up with the FIPT. How many people want to change the FIPT? And all these hands go up, and then they go, well, 90% of the conference wants to change the FIPT. So be careful about those votes that come up like that, because it does like make it into the materials that is tracked. And it'll say 80% of the conference voted to change the FIPT. And you're like, wait a minute, I didn't really get that's what I was voting for. But it will make it into the service material, and it will get published. So those votes are important. Another thing I was thinking when people were sharing was about the way you guys do it with the delegate team, at least having an alternate. So there's another benefit of alternates. So when these things happen, there's at least one other person to talk to about what your plan, what to do. So the regions that cannot afford to send an alternate and one person is there by themselves trying to figure out what to do, you know, I have a lot of compassion for them, because at least having an alternate gives you someone to talk to if you're not streaming it live like Dennis is, which I'm not going to do. And another thing I was thinking, Dennis, for us is we want to add something in here about how you do bring emotion. It's quite a complex procedure, as Sherry pointed out. And if we move this forward, we may want to have a little thing about explaining how you do get a regional motion in the car, which is a very complex thing. Oh, I see Ruben's got his hand up too. Let me do Ruben first and then Dennis, and then we'll be done. Go ahead, Ruben.
I think Dennis was before me. Go ahead.
Okay, Dennis, go ahead.
Okay, and thanks, Sandy. And I didn't honestly have the same experience with the car motions that maybe you guys did. Northern New York put in 3 motions and 1 Zoom meeting and 2 emails, and we were good. So I worked with Becky and Junior on that. in like thinking back to this whole thing and thinking back to Sergio's question, this is why this particular workshop and the way that we structured all these workshops focus on having conversations with your region about your culture, the expectations, building trust, knowing these things before you go to the conference so you don't go there unprepared going, wait, how am I going to do this? I don't know, wait, but my region feels, wait, I don't know what I'm doing here.
Right.
So knowing this is coming, knowing that this is how you interact, knowing all these different things helps have that conversation with the region of these things are what's going to come up. How do you feel about me going this way with this? And then also looking at every car and cat workshop that we do as delegates, everything that we do at areas is a trust building exercise in a sense, because what's even more challenging, because I agree that everything we go and learn, like me going through and reading the minutes from 76 to current, I made it through that 3.5 times. I've never made it that last half time, and I'm due to go through again. But that was information that I had that most members don't. Doing the car cat workshops, presenting the information without telling people what to think about that, help build trust that they could tell me their voice and it would be carried, whether I liked it or not. But also if someone was like, hey, zones are going to do this and they're going to take over the, no, that's not on the table. It's not what's being discussed here. If this happens, I did the work and the research necessary to be able to answer questions so that members trusted that A, I was going to follow their conscience if it came up, but B, if something came up that didn't have their conscience behind it, they knew I'd done the work and they trusted the work that I did. So there was a trust on both ends. And then if I did step out, which I overstepped a couple times, and they called me out for it, and they understood that I was open to being called out if I did overstep, and that I was really just trying to be of service in that conduit. Like all of that is trust and transparency, and all of our interactions as delegates build that. So it is definitely a challenge in presenting. Like when I did car workshops, I would take the NOAA's PowerPoints and then I would modify those, add slides in there of information I got from other car workshops, information I got from minutes from the history of how we got to this point. I put a slide in there, what will happen if this passes? Not speculation, purely what will happen as a project plan, what a project plan will be presented in this year. Then it'll come up for conscience at this time, because some people will go, well, we're voting for a piece of literature now. It's like, no, you're voting for a project plan to come out 2 years from now that has to pass again, then it has to go through another cycle or two of votes and this long process. Like most pieces of book length literature takes 4 total votes at the conference, I think. 2 in car, 3 in car, 1 in cat. It's long, no, 2 cat, 2 car, because it's back and forth. Car, cat, car. Anyways, I'd have to look at it, but it's 4 conference votes for a book length piece of literature. It's not an overnight thing. Even the Fellowship Intellectual Property Trust changes. That's a car vote that will be coming. There's a review and input right now for those changes. That was a work group of members, World Board, delegates, all that made those changes. And it was a motion by the World Board that we as a fellowship voted on to go ahead and open that door to even think about it. Like all this stuff comes back to us. And right. I need to, as a delegate, remember our second tradition and trust our second tradition to some extent. That no, we're not, a single vote by me at the conference isn't going to make or break Narcotics Anonymous. Being a participant and building that trust with my region and helping my region feel empowered and connected to the wide world of Narcotics Anonymous might help them make more informed decisions next time if I don't feel they're making informed decisions this time. Might help them trust a delegate more next cycle to where they can put forth those car motions. Because like I said, I stepped forward and made a new business proposal for new literature in the 2016 conference. And the RCM from Rochester brought their conscience going, hey, wait, whoa. As a region, we didn't vote for that. You might have heard that from an area or two in a workshop. We as a region didn't say you could do that. And then us as a region had a conversation about that, which resulted in a car motion. And because we were open to that, and because of that transparency and that trust that had been built and continue to get built, we were able to move forward on something like that, not just go, oh, well, screw this, you screwed up and don't dare you do that again. So it is a fine balance. And sometimes there's times I voted on things I didn't agree with just because I knew that's how my region felt. And even if I felt I had better information, The reason I knew that if I did that, I would be breaking that trust in some form that would have longer term unity implications. Because I look at a cost of unity. Like there's financial cost, but there's also unity as a commodity in Narcotics Anonymous. It is something tremendously valuable. And sometimes what we do in Narcotics Anonymous has a great financial, but a high cost of unity. And I always keep unity in mind because I consider that a graver cost if we are damaging that. So I looked at the trust and the visibility and working through all that stuff and that was part of why I did the work that I did through the process and reading and having all the conversations I did, was so that when I did go to the conference, I had that trust of the members because I'd done the interactions I did in the workshops and they could trust me as a delegate. Actual funny story on that is I went to one of the zonal forums and I was reporting. I almost felt like the region trusted me too much because they didn't question me enough at one point. And one of the board members happened to be there. It's like, well, it's part of your responsibility as a delegate to almost help sponsor them into asking you more questions. You need to get them into that. That's part of your job, to get them to questioning more. They can trust you all they want, but they need to that's up to you to help them better understand the value of questioning you. And she was right.
Thank you.
That's what I got.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ruben.
Good morning, good afternoon. I don't know what time it is, but it's, well, just past morning here. So my name's Ruben. I'm incoming RDA for Southern California.
Welcome.
And I have a couple of questions. It's very interesting, the stuff that I've heard so far on the voting. And when did they start doing straw polls at the World Service Conference? Does anybody have that answer?
Dennis, who's read all minutes since whatever.
Straw polls are largely a tool of consensus-based decision-making, which has been slowly growing at the conference. Straw polls are technically non-binding, and when Sandy referred to straw polls are a method for facilitators, in the case of the conference being the board members are listening to what the conference members are voting. It's not binding, it's not a fellowship conscience, and they can't act on it in the same way that they can a car or cat motion. But it is listening to a voice saying, okay, well, how do you feel about this? Okay, well, we're hearing that you guys feel about this. So we're gonna do some work on that. And if it requires a motion to actually take an action, they'll present that. Just like with the FIPT, it was the majority of the conference said, yeah, you know what, the FIPT should be looked at, but the board couldn't just edit the FIPT. It required a motion to even open that door. So they heard the voice being, well, yeah, we would like to see this process start, but they couldn't actually do it without an official car motion vote. So straw polls are just a method of listening to the voice of the body. That's it.
But I don't know when they started. They were doing them when I
early 2000s.
Vehicle for temperature. And if a straw poll demonstrates no opposition, that can then become a decision under certain consensus-based decision-making things. But a straw poll can allow you to avoid conversation where you've already got consensus.
Right, but they are used, as Lewis said, is that will be published. Like if it is consensus, they'll say it was the consensus. And a lot of times we didn't really realize that. I thought for myself, I didn't really realize that was gonna be like somewhat binding because we reached consensus. And the delegates only did it and it never went to the groups, which is just something that I'm getting at here. You know what I mean? But I don't know when. I know they were doing it in 2014. I don't know before that, but maybe Sherry knows.
And you just brought up something very interesting, that it was not brought up to the groups. And there's a lot of stuff that happens at the World Service Conference that the groups never heard of, but yet they say that it was the conscience of the groups that
they'll say it's the conscience of the conference. They will say that.
But the conference is the groups. See, I'm old school. The conscience is the groups, because it says that in the concepts. If you read the concepts, the final decision is on the NA groups.
But the third concept says that how does it go? That the delegates, the third concept is the NA groups delegate to the service structure the authority necessary to fulfill the responsibilities assigned to it. So thus is the point of this talk.
And at some point, the trusted servant is carrying the conscience.
So, okay, so my point was, see, I wanted to know about the straw post because I work from home because of the pandemic. I was able to attend on my own computer while I worked on my other computer for work, the virtual WSC last year. And one of the things I did notice about straw polls is that they pushed the straw polls until they got what they wanted. You know,
well, we don't want to get too political here, Ruben.
Okay. Sorry.
It's okay. I hear you though, but I did raise that for that reason. I'm not going to get into political debates about it, but I will say that as Lewis pointed out, they are somewhat binding. It's not really just a straw poll. It does get published often, and it can be a little bit binding if it's a strong consensus. But go ahead, right. Sherry. I think we just have time. It's 3:11, so we have Sherry, and maybe we can squeeze in Lewis, and then we're going to have to close the queue. Go ahead, Sherry.
One thing I'd like to say though is the fact that you know, back when we did the motion on the medallions, we were motion driven. We're not as motion driven now. And the thing is that we're getting a wonderful survey about literature and about some other things that goes to the whole fellowship. And for me, that is a fellowship conscience, and it's the most binding conscience. But the problem is that when you do a CAR motion and put that in, that overrides that fellowship because of the way it's written, that fellowship conscience in the survey. And I don't know how many people really know that then stops the whole process of going into a project plan. And everything has to stop that may have been voted on at the last conference to proceed on, has to stop in order to take care of that motion. You know, it can get real complicated with motion driven from the CAR. And my suggestion is to look at that survey. And if it's in that survey, you don't need a CAR motion to emphasize it. You know, sometimes I wonder if we just want our name in the CAR. We don't need it if it's already there. And we will get a fellowship conscience on it. And it's really important. And one other thing on group voting, you know, we try to get the pulse of our region, but bottom line, in our policy, we have a vote of confidence from our region.
There you go. That is important. What does your policy say? It's very important. What does your policy say? My policy specifically says we use group tally. Sherry's policy says they do not. So whatever, your policy is important too. And that's nothing about what you read outside of all those materials, those surveys.
We do use that. But if something comes up that wasn't there, then we have a vote of confidence.
Right. So that's something to bring up in your local policy, maybe. Thank you for that, Sherry. And also what I was saying, what to read outside all those reading material is the surveys, right? So you have the pulse, your finger on the pulse of the fellowship a little bit. All right, Lewis, bring us home. You got 1 minute.
Okay, I'm Lewis. I'm an addict. The point I wanted to raise has gone outside my head. So, except I do want to say that this is an illustration of something that was really new to me when we started designing these workshops. And I too always thought that I'm there to represent my region and do that only, without recognizing that there are lots of fellowship approved documents out there that tell me that I do something different and that I was completely unprepared for. And so I'm really grateful that Sandy is the one that brought this topic up in the first place. And yet again, Sandy has contributed amazing stuff.
Thank you, Lewis.
I'm really grateful for that. Thanks a lot for letting me share.
How's the leak in the roof?
Well, I determined that it's not in the roof because in the meantime, I went up to my neighbor's apartment who wasn't there, that her unit is fine upstairs. So therefore, it's my new window installation.
There you go. And Des just chimed in about her region. Well, thank you, everybody. So that's that. We have some work to do on this one when the team meets together. But I think overall, you know, put your comments about that presentation or Lewis's in the chat because it's a work in progress. So thank you, everybody. And we'll see you in, I guess I'll give it back to Dennis. 3:15.
Yep, thank you. And we have technically a 15-minute break. We can sit here and chat for anyone that wants to sit here, doesn't need a break, but Yeah, great job. And yes, we will be having a debrief on all of these workshops at our next delegate training work group, because the work group isn't done. We still meet every 2 weeks for probably the next month. So we'll be doing some more tweaks to these, and I've been taking notes through the day too for my stuff. And yes, this is definitely a great demonstration that how different regions are, and you can't just go one size fits all. And when you get to the conference, different regions go, how dare you do this? Like there's the ones that are specifically, I come with the car vote and anything else is out of order. How dare you even ask me? And then there's the delegates that come with, well, I'm given a vote of confidence. How dare you not be along with me voting these? It's like, wait a minute. Both your ways of interacting with the conference are perfectly valid and should be respected. Like each region has, it's up to each region to come up with, to determine for themselves how they practice the second tradition and how they interface with the conference. And it's up to the conference to respect that and respect all the diverse viewpoints. Because like I've always viewed, when we say our diversity is our strength, it's not necessarily our diversity of any kind of race, creed, or anything. It's our diversity of thoughts and beliefs and how we live and how we practice NA. And just, we can't, like, there is no one size fits all, especially when you get to the conference. And there's not really any point of any region saying, how dare you to another region. Show up and participate with whatever your region says, participate. And in some cases, we should all trust the second tradition a little bit more to understand that each region had their own second tradition conscience that determined how they're going to interface with the conference. So we don't really have the right to tell another region, you're wrong for coming here this way, whether you're coming delegated or coming representative or coming as a hybrid, as I did. We can't tell another region because they had their own second tradition process that determined how they're coming to the conference. And I would just ask that we tend to trust that a little bit more. And then like with the straw polls, my reference to straw polls being non-binding was if there's a decision level that needs to happen, like if it's something that requires a car motion, it's still going to require a car motion. A straw poll cannot take the place of another decision and being binding that way. If it's something that requires a group conscience down or up to the group level, a straw poll cannot take on that weight. A straw poll can take on giving our world services direction and an indication of maybe where they should put some effort or a motion that they should draft for the next conference type thing.
You know,
and a lot of time, a lot of time, like what I observed at the conference with the straw polls, and I've run into this, even being facilitator for the Northeast Zonal Forum or facilitator for different bodies, sometimes you have to revisit a question because the body is contentious in the way that it was asked in the first place and can't come to an agreement with a decision based on how the question is asked. So as a facilitator, you end up challenged to re-ask the question different ways until the body can make a decision. For or against doesn't matter, but a decision as a consensus one way or the other. So I observed that the way some of the questions were asked, the body was not happy with and kept saying, no, revisit this. No, revisit this. No, revisit this. Okay, we'll ask this again. Okay, we'll ask it this way. What if we ask it this way? Okay, oh, we're good. All right, we're against that. Great, we made a decision. Or we're for that. Great, we made a decision. A lot of the facilitation there is just a nature of making a decision together.